And what he's pointing to with this third one is a way, I think, particularly for some of the academics who recognize this crap is what it is, crap, to push back on this. So I wanted to do part two with this particular article, and this part two is going to focus actually on the last section, and I may just read through a lot of it in here, because in the last section of this article, because the first section, everything I did in the other video, in the previous video, was all about microaggressions and what's wrong with the literature and things like that, and the fact that it really isn't meaningful, and the whole thing of microaggressions has actually no real credible evidence behind it. And there's that, and then also the issues with disagreement and silencing dissent and what have you, and talking about some of the problems with critical theory and critical race theory and the imposition of that in microaggressions research. And odds are, if you're hearing about microaggressions in a training, you're hearing critical race theory related stuff at this point, or critical theory stuff at a minimum. But the last section of the article, they actually talked in real depth about the broader concerns they have with this ideology. And it's not a theory, it's an ideology. Plain up, right there. Theories go through vetting, many, many years of vetting, many, many decades of vetting Theories are hypotheses that go through many decades of vetting, and that's how you get to having a theory. But, of course, this ideology hasn't. It's just been taken and assumed. Not very well, actually. And the reason I want to go through it is seeing them stand up and say how much of a bad idea this is, or how much they think this is a bad idea, is something I want to applaud. I want to cheer that these guys are doing this. And the reason why is, as much as it's important to push back on woke nonsense, and I do believe it is very important to push back on woke stuff and critical race theory and critical theory, as it's been invading more and more of the different sectors and poisoning a lot of things. It's also really important for the academics, folks in my position, on others in their positions, to push back also against this nonsense in the mediums that will get them the most exposure in their fields to say that this is a bad idea. And that is exactly what these two did. This is Edward Cantu and Lee Jusum who wrote this. Cantu is a law professor, and Jusum is a psychology professor and the chair of the department at Rutgers. So they're both saying, no, this isn't a good idea related to this stuff, and, what have you. And yes, in this article they were talking about microaggressions, but a lot of what they're saying could be very easily applied to that at all, to the whole shebang of wokeness right now. And so I do want to go down to that section and just read through fair chunks of it, because there's so much of it that's really good, and it was a really eloquent and passionately written defense and raising the concerns that they have with this nonsense invading their fields, invading the public square, and the concerns that they have for free speech, because that's the final part of the article, is the concerns about critical theory and microaggressions and what that means for free speech. And I apologize if you hear the mouse wheel scrolling, because I gotta get all the way back down there to the end here, because this is a long article, which is again why I've tried to read through it and summarize it for you. But okay, and it is this section: the cost of the current microaggressions construct propagation. And I would actually say, again, like I said, this whole thing here that I'm going to read from here down a bit, is actually very applicable to the entirety of critical theory and critical race theory, I think. In that they do so much to try and silence dissent. They do try and chill voices. You're being terrified of being called a racist. I'm sorry, you're going to be called a racist at this point. I'm sure I'm probably going to face it here soon enough, even at some point here, whether I like it or not, kind of thing. So I'm going to say it anyway. Critical race theory is racist. Congratulations. There's my hot take for the day. But I want to read this section because I think in particular it's a very well-written and very good, passionate defense of what a university should be, and indeed what I think, partially at least what I think a university should be, but also a very passionate response to these are the problems that we see if we let this continue. And so this is something I think folks can point to. Of course, I would like to, shrink it to make it bite-sized for the rest of us. But it is something you can point to say, look, I got a problem with this and here's why. And it does come back to free speech. Both of us remember our years of college and graduate education quite fondly. While the turmoil of youth invariably crept into those experiences, our minds were supple, and we experienced the growth that springs from the openness and intellectual wanderlust of young adulthood. Both of us doubt we will ever again experience that kind of intellectual and personal growth that comes from being thrust into the college environment. Brilliant professors ready to tax our minds, peers from different parts of the country or world, and with different backgrounds, and a tacit understanding that we were all there not only to grow, but to help others grow as well. Given the nature of the college atmosphere and the purposes for that atmosphere, it might be second to none among contexts where impressionable minds can be taught to tolerate, respect, and appreciate difference. For example, a white student who grew up around very few people of color is likely to recalibrate her worldview and interpretive instincts upon experiencing friendships and genuine connections with non-white peers, and she is likely to gain an empathy for those peers that flows from open and authentic interaction and familiarity with them. Perhaps there are moments of tension as previously conditioned kinks are ironed out, but this is an unavoidable part of the process of personal enrichment through engagement with difference, a process that depends on the willingness of all involved to meet in the commons of a shared humanity. Both of us are from traditionally marginalized groups, and we have both faced ugliness from others as a result. But neither of us remembers being constantly assaulted with microaggressions while in college, nor do we remember suffering extreme harm when we did experience them. Perhaps this is because psychologists had not yet lifted the veil for us, such that we could not yet see hidden and extremely subtle racism in everyday encounters with well-intentioned people. Perhaps, but microaggression researchers have not provided a good basis for us to believe they have revealed anything of the sort. They merely claim it, and to us, this is not enough. And this is one thing I want to make a point on. They're claiming it, demand that they prove it. It is totally appropriate to push back and say, you know what, that's your assumption, can you prove it? Can you prove it? Can you prove that this is? Can you prove that that's that? Can you do that, what have you? And I would add on the extra justification that just because something, a word or a phrase may have started from a much different time than we live in, that doesn't necessarily make it evil today, because interpretations of words change. Given the influence of critical race theory, both of our respective disciplines, law and psychology, are currently preoccupied with the notion that racism has gone into hiding, as overt racism, now unacceptable, lurks in the subtle features of daily life. While we don't doubt that racism can and does take subtle and unconscious forms, we find no basis to conclude that the nature and extent of this subtle racism are what critically oriented scholars claim, which is basically to say, no, racism is not everywhere in everyday interaction and what have you. That's the point of that paragraph. Yet we fear that microaggression researchers, via their alleged insights, are increasingly teaching people of color that they are under constant assault, that they are being conditioned to be constructively offended, that is, offended because they are taught that they are supposed to be in situations that do not implicate racism. In other words, we fear they're being encouraged to develop what Sue et al. Term a, quote, healthy paranoia as a result. But, quote, it is bad enough to suffer real prejudice without having to suffer imaginary prejudice as well. There is nothing healthy about the racial paranoia that the CMC might be stoking, microaggressions construct, as it may be a recipe for fanning the flames of intergroup conflict without any noticeable benefits with respect to justice. And this is one of the big points I want to say. This is why I get so pissed with critical race theory and why critical race theory is racist. They're actually hitting it right here in this thing. And that's why, again, I love it. I'm so thrilled that they're doing this. And this is why I was like, so excited when I found this article, because thank you. Academics, you're finally getting into your own media and saying it. Saying that this is crap. Critical race theory is crap, essentially. So, but that's one of the things they're saying here. That goes to the thing about critical race theory where they teach people of color, Black, Hispanic, Asian, what have you, that you are oppressed. You're constantly going to be in trouble. And one of the things they teach as part of that is, oh, you should be offended at this thing, even though it's utterly innocuous. and that's all part of that. You're teaching people to be perpetually offended and angry, to be perpetually a victim, telling them they can never succeed. That's what they're pointing to in this, with that. And that's horrific and racist that you are telling somebody who is Asian, Black, Hispanic, what have you, any number of the minorities that we have, that they can't succeed, that they should be offended, that they're perpetually a victim because of their race. That is wrong, that is racist. That's what critical race theory does. And we fear that researchers are teaching white people that racism permeates virtually everything they do, that their good intentions don't matter, and resultingly that they should walk on eggshells when interacting with people of color. This strikes us as an excellent recipe for harming rather than helping interracial relations. As psychologist Kenneth R. Thomas has stated, quote, "The restrictions on normal human interaction recommended by Sue and his associates, if implemented, could have a chilling effect on free speech and on the willingness of white people, including some psychologists, to interact with people of color." And this is the other problem, is you're being told all the time. It's one of the things in the video whether or not diversity training is effective that I did on this channel. This is another thing that I talked about actually too, and others have talked about. It's just like, you're making people walk on eggshells. They can't connect with each other because you're promoting the division. You're promoting that nothing a white person does is good, and you're promoting to all the minorities in our community that, you know, they can't succeed. They can't succeed. They're helpless victims. They can't succeed. No. All of that is completely wrong, and it will have a chilling effect on free speech if it hasn't already. And interactions with people, and some of the research has shown this, people walk on eggshells after diversity trainings because you've made them oversensitive to these things, and you made the white colleagues think, oh, all my peers of color are oversensitive. Are really sensitive, so I can't say what I'm thinking around them for fear of offending them. They can't be honest and open, have a good dialogue. Is this sustainable? In attempting to answer this question, readers should consider also that this walking on eggshells response by well-intentioned whites can also be considered a racist microaggression. According to Williams, this is an example of aversive racism. Quote, "Avoidance, exclusion, and ostracization are all recognized in psychology as forms of aggression, and many microaggressions fall into this category. Interracial anxieties on the part of offenders may play a role in situations in which would-be offenders do not want to appear prejudiced and are motivated by a desire to avoid wrongdoing. As a result, when in the company of people of color, they may stumble over the words, say something they did not intend, say nothing, or leave the situation entirely. Although wanting to avoid wrongdoing could be considered well-intentioned behavior, one must also consider what motivates the offender's discomfort and the consequences to the person of color in that interaction. Readers should also consider that an alternative to walking on eggshells, a speaker's denial of having committed a microaggression, is also a microaggression. Robin DiAngelo, white fragility. That's right in there what one of the things they're talking about. According to Williams, quote, "It is problematic that a typical response to a microaggression is denial from the offender, also conceptualized as gaslighting. This is a second microaggression and only compounds the damage from the initial assault." So basically, not wanting to interact with people is racist, interacting with people is racist. So let's just make it all racist in that thing. We submit the answer is no. This is not sustainable. In short, we are concerned that the current microaggressions construct can be disruptive to what arguably is the most significant prerequisite to effectively combat bigotry: interpersonal connection, goodwill, charity, and a reflexive humanism, as opposed to a reflexive emphasis on difference. In light of this, we think greater vigilance about the integrity of knowledge production is needed, especially when it comes to socially controversial, complicated, and sensitive topics such as the nature and extent of subtle racism. Bravo. I'm glad you say it. That's the key point of the whole section here, is that this is precisely what critical theory and critical race theory does, and a lot of the DEI trainings that are based on this do it also, is there's such a focus on difference, and that this person is oppressed by nature of their race, sex, gender, whatever and this person is not in the research. And I am so glad that these two academics in their own field, in a journal publication in their own field, are pointing out this is this is garbage, what they're doing, and this is a big problem because it's not going to help combat bigotry if you're alienating people from each other. You're not letting people develop good interpersonal connections. You're not letting people see the humanity in others if you're focusing on all these identity categories and whether or not somebody's oppressed or not. You are an individual. You are beautiful. You are a beautiful individual. You're human. You are the ultimate minority because you as an individual, there's only you. You're not going to exist somewhere else. There's not two of you, and I hope they don't figure out cloning anytime soon. That would just be weird. But you're not going to exist anywhere else. So your humanity is the most important thing. And the problem with this nonsense, with all the microaggressions and what have you, and the way critical race theory works, the way DEI trainings are done currently, and this is shown in the research and the other videos I've done on this channel, they do not allow you to develop that interpersonal connection very well. They don't allow you to do it. They don't allow goodwill and charity. And if you're walking on eggshells, you can't get that interpersonal connection. You can't build trust. You can't, it's not going to happen if you're going in from the standpoint of, well, you're awful, you're this, you're that, and assigning those characteristics up front. No. Need an approach that starts from humanity first. I'm kind of partial to theory of enchantment just from what I've read. But start from the common humanity and recognize people as individuals. The incessant focus on difference based on identity is not going to help things. The Supreme Court is not on the verge of allowing the government to ban any speech researchers claim to be microaggressions, so we don't mean to suggest the problem we identify is currently knocking on constitutional doors, but the problem is already soliciting in the constitutional neighborhood. From a legal perspective, our biggest concerns are contexts such as campus speech codes. We are not aware of any campus speech codes that outright ban and penalize the commission of microaggressions. However, many colleges and universities now have bias reporting systems. Students are encouraged to report to authorities anything they witness, whether it happens to be to them or to someone else, that constitutes some sort of bias. If students learn that statements like "I believe in merit" or "America's a melting pot" reflect racism, they may well report those making these statements to authorities, thereby chilling speech without direct punishment. And that is the thing. That is an important thing. These are innocuous statements, as far as I'm concerned, that any reasonable person who's not crazy woke would know are not crazy. But if more and more you teach students these kinds of things, and particularly as you're starting in K through 12 with this too, and go over to the reason we learn, Deb Philman can probably fill you in on that. But the more you get into that, this is going to be bad. And with the bias reporting things, people are going to report each other for microaggressions at this point. And it goes into a very Soviet communist style direction, which I'm not comfortable with. There is a long history of universities pushing and often violating First Amendment boundaries in order to protect students from offensive speech. This, combined with the fact that academic culture is extremely inclined to subscribe to ideas such as the current microaggression construct, provides ample reasons to be concerned that First Amendment problems are brewing. For example, recently, University of North Texas professor Nathaniel Ayers was fired for criticizing the concept of microaggressions and for failing to attend a microaggression training that would set him straight. In other words, he refused to be re-educated. Apparently, the head of Ayers' department told Ayers that he, quote, fired him because he criticized microaggressions flyers and didn't express honest regret about his actions. Stop and think about that for a second. That you're being fired because you criticized something. You didn't say, and you didn't express honest regret about your actions. If it's a difference of opinion, you don't have to express honest regret. And good on this professor, too, this guy Ayers, for not backing down and for saying he wasn't going to do this. It cost him his job, which is, I'm sorry about that, but thank goodness for him standing up for that, because that was the right thing to do. As mentioned in the introduction, student protesters at UCLA have attacked professors for committing the microaggression of correcting students' grammar. In the wake of this controversy, a report advised the administration to engage in tactics to chill microaggressive speech without banning or punishing it outright, which the First Amendment clearly would not allow. We recognize that not all of the incidents of perceived discrimination which faculty members complain will be actionable. Several faculty members referenced the notion of microaggressions. Some enhanced record keeping would allow the university to monitor the number of complaints regarding such incidents and therefore to better understand the campus climate for faculty and students of color. And finally, investigations might deter those who would engage in such conduct, even if their actions would likely not constitute a violation of university policy. In other words, for those of you who might be listening who's a student at a university or watching from a university or, what have you, make sure you check this, that they are not keeping records of microaggressions. Because this is a way to silence people. That's what this amounts to, is it's a way to silence people. This is UCLA that they're talking about here, that was encouraged there to track your microaggressions. How freaking terrifying do you think that is? This is what they're pointing out here, and this is a very good thing to point out, because if you know that anything innocuous you say that might offend somebody is going to go in a record somewhere, my God, what are you going to want to say? Who are you going to work with? I mean, that's the end of free speech. And for those of you who are dealing with this, say fuck them. All right? Say fuck them and speak your mind anyway, and don't be silenced by these assholes. All right? You can bring they can do whatever they like. Just don't bend the knee. That's all I can say with that. Don't bend the knee. Say fuck them and speak your mind anyway, even if you have these bias reporting centers and what have you here. And you know what? Bring it up with things like FIRE, because FIRE's actually done a good job of that. FIRE's got problems in other ways, but FIRE's done actually a fairly decent job handling campus speech codes and things like that. Students at Emory University have demanded that student evaluation forms be modified to include a field wherein students can report instructor microaggressions. As the Emory students have made clear, questions like this on faculty evaluations would help to ensure that there are repercussions or sanctions for racist actions performed by professors. That is, students have demanded professors be punished for committing acts that professors likely would not have known, and likely had no way of knowing, would be perceived as racist. So your intent be damned, let's put it that way. Intent be damned, you're going to be punished for what you said. That's the goal there with those students. In response to, and frankly, where the hell are the administrators? Where the hell are the administrators being the adults in the room with this? And telling the students this is a bad idea and here's why? Good grief. In response to incidents such as these, the Foundation for Individual Rights in Education has raised concerns. FIRE. The inherent subjectivity and elasticity of the concept of microaggressions make a clear objective definition all but impossible in practice. And without a shared understanding of what speech or action may constitute a microaggression, students and faculty run the risk of being reported for speech protected by the First Amendment that nevertheless crosses an invisible line drawn by and known only to the offended party. Now, this is interesting because the definition of microaggressions in the microaggressions research, if you were looking at it earlier, if you were looking at the other video, is that it doesn't matter what the intent of the speaker was. It doesn't matter if the person who heard it wasn't offended. It's still a microaggression because of some embedded racist meaning that's objectively there. And yet the only one who can know that is who the offended party is. Just noting the contradiction that's there. As FIRE notes, the Emory administration came perilously close to saying it will accede to student demands and that such demands are clearly designed to motivate professors to toe the political line in a class. Again, free speech, remember, it has to go both ways. It has to protect speech you don't like, too. As another example, the student government at Ithaca College a few years ago passed a resolution to create an online system to report microaggressions on campus, with some students pushing for a system wherein oppressors, those who commit microaggressions, would have their names recorded. Again, public record of you saying something innocuous that somebody got offended by. In other words, say fuck 'em, say you're going to say it anyway. To his credit, microaggression researcher Sue has cautioned against using his work to support punishing individuals who commit microaggressions. Sue has stated that he, quote, was concerned that people who use these examples of microaggressions from his work would take them out of context and use them as a punitive rather than an exemplary way. But the horse is out of the barn, and researchers have no control over where it tramples. And this is another very true statement. Consider how some critical race theorists frame the nature and extent of racism in American society and call for speech regulations to combat it. While not mentioning microaggressions specifically, Richard Delgado has written about how, quote, racism's victims become sensitized to its subtle nuances and code words, the body language, averted gazes, exasperated looks, terms such as you people, innocent whites, and highly qualified black, articulate, and so on, that whether intended or not convey racially charged meanings. It should be clear at this point that what Delgado was describing in 1992 were microaggressions, and incidentally, this quote should also make clear the fact that critical race theory conception of the nature and extent of racism has most certainly spread into other fields such as psychology. Delgado suggested that First Amendment doctrine ought to bend to accommodate, for example, campus speech codes that would protect lowly and vulnerable members of our society, such as isolated young black undergraduates. Delgado is not alone. Calls for current free speech doctrine to bend to allow for the protection of people of color from hate speech is a common feature in critical race theory. For example, a prominent critical race theorist, Mary Matsuda, has called for formal criminal sanction for racist speech. Protect the First Amendment, people. That's all I got to say with that one, because that is freaking scary, because who defines what... If you're talking about microaggressions and getting a formal criminal sanction for saying something innocuous that somebody else was offended by, just think on it for a minute, because it's pretty damn terrifying. Iana Tokachorti has argued, drawing on critical race theory, that the harm caused by hate speech is significant enough to justify limitations. And harm here, they are not talking about physical harm. They are talking about emotional harm. Oh, the emotional harm. To be fair, such scholars are usually referring to speech that is more blatant and aggressively racist than microaggressions usually are. But three realities are, we fear, problematically converging. First, critical race theory is increasingly enjoying mainstream status in academic work on race discourse in the media, and in the social justice zeitgeist. Second, critical theorists generally subscribe to the postmodern presupposition about the subtle role of discourse in shaping reality and identity. Third, the social sciences, heavily influenced by critical theory, are increasingly uncovering ever more ways that subtle aspects of daily life, such as discourse norms, help further entrench an unjust status quo. The ostensible empirical basis that the latter phenomenon provides the first two portends, we fear, increasing demands for the policing of ever more subtle aspects of human interaction. As discussed above, we've already seen this beginning to happen on college campuses with regards to microaggressions. Given the nature of cancel culture, I would actually argue to these professors that that's actually happened a lot more outside of campus lately. And with people actually being terrified to speak up and say something in their places of work for fear of losing their jobs and any number of different things. That's happened already, so I think you're a little late to the party there, but still, I am thrilled to see these academics saying all this, and that's why I wanted to read that whole section all the way through, those two sections, because it's such a brilliant thing here. And what he's pointing to with this third one is a way, I think, particularly for some of the academics who recognize this crap is what it is, crap, to push back on this. What he has done in the sections of the article I read in the other video, and some of the things that I sort of summarized, is to critique the methods and to specifically go after them in the particular couple of questions. There's two key principles of scientific inquiry that can play in here, guiding principles of scientific inquiry. One of them is, of course, the third one. Does the method actually answer the question? And the other one is the related one to it. Is there logical, coherent, explicit reasoning that somebody else can follow involved in this? Those two things are what the authors attacked when they were looking at the literature with microaggressions and pointed out how faulty and flawed it is. They don't answer the question, and the reasoning's so far out there that it doesn't make any sense. And yet it still got published because of the idea laundering. And peer review is actually really, really difficult sometimes to get people who were to be critical and to have the time to critique an article. Because like I said yesterday, I'm not paid to do peer review. I do it on top of everything else I'm doing in academia. And so you just want to get it done. You just want to get it out the door and this kind of thing like that. So, I mean, it would be great if you provided some extra incentive for me to do peer review. You know, can you give me like a bonus, like, I don't know, like $500 an article or something like that? That would be great. Provide a little incentive. Get paid to do it. That would actually probably help, I think. But peer review? No, you don't get paid to do peer review. And often, as I was talking with a friend of mine who's an editor of a journal, it's really difficult to get people to actually sign on to review an article. People forget to review articles. People just don't. They say they're going to review and they don't, and that leaves the editor up a creek. And then sometimes they just do a shitty review. They don't spend the time to actually critique all these things carefully that they need to and that they're supposed to. And so it's a reminder to go back and do that. And, you know, I am all for citizen science, actually. So I think this is one thing that people can do, is if you can get in there and you have some background and understanding, you can critique this kind of stuff. You can see if it makes sense. You can forward me an article, forward a scientist an article, and ask them, hey, does this actually make any sense what they're doing here? It may be difficult to get them because, again, they're really, really busy. But that's one thing to do here, you know. Rip apart the articles. Rip apart the research, because what these two brave and brilliant professors have done is actually ripped apart the microaggressions research beautifully. And I encourage, again, to go back and look at the methods section here where they talk about it, and it's really well done in here. But they've also laid out a lot of the big concerns. And I think one of the things you have to do is to rip this down, because this area right here, with articles that make it through, with research that makes it through, that is based upon bullshit practices and poor practices with methodological things right here, that's one of the reasons it gets through, because it then has the veneer of science. It has the veneer of science. And so you can push it out there. Well, this was done by the scientists, don't you agree? And you're using that expert authority kind of thing and appeal to authority in a way to then say, oh, well, no, this has got to be real. This has got to be a real thing. Look at this article. But nobody thinks to critique the methods, to go after it, because that's not where most people are. Most of the time, the scientists are there, but sometimes, of course, we're busy. Or any number of different things. Busy, don't have enough time, we don't get paid to do it, any number of different things I can argue there, but point is, it just doesn't get done. But I am thrilled with these two, and I suggest, if you need something in this section to talk about the issues with microaggressions, with critical theory and critical race theory, and you want something a little more articulate to work with, I encourage you to read through this particular section of the paper. I encourage you to read the whole thing, because it's actually easier to read than you think. But I'm thrilled, and that's why I wanted to highlight this particular section all on its own. These two professors, Professor Cantu and Professor Jusem, bravo to you. I am thrilled that you put this out there in the public sphere via journal. And this article is available. Anybody can download it. So I'm thrilled to see it out there. I congratulate you for doing it. Thank you for putting it out there and speaking up on behalf of your respective fields, that this is a load of garbage that doesn't belong in either one. And I agree with you on that. It doesn't belong in any field of science. It doesn't belong anywhere, really, except for maybe some discussions in academia where it should be. Anyway, that's it. If you like this video, please subscribe to the channel, share the video, comment on the video below, and all that jazz. If you'd like to interact more with me, become a supporter at sciworthy.locals.com. You can also follow me on Twitter. I will tag that in here for you. You can follow me on Twitter. And that's it for now. I will be back at some point again soon with another video, probably. I'm having fun ripping apart articles. Let me know what you think. Ripping into articles, reviewing articles, talking about the good things, talking about the bad things, ripping apart logical fallacies. Oh yeah, I saw a site. I saw an interesting article on using chemistry to combat extremism, something like that, having to do with the Proud Boys and what have you. So I might go rip into that article when I get the chance. Anyway, that's it for now. I'm Adrian, signing off. Till next time, stay curious, my friends.